Welcome, everybody, to the Burn Bootcamp podcast. I am excited. Today we're talking about a very important topic, and a topic that I get a lot of questions about, and that is how nutrition impacts the various life stages, including menopause, pregnancy, perimenopause, and postmenopausal. So I, of course, needed to bring on an amazing guest, someone who spoke at our member summit. So if you're at member summit, you got to hear from our next guest. But we are so excited to have special guest Abbie Smith-Ryan, professor of exercise physiology and nutrition, joining us to explore the crucial role of nutrition in women's health. So Abbie, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much to be here. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you are a wealth of knowledge. You got to share with some tidbits with our audience at Member Summit. So I'm excited to have you on. But let's just first start with a little bit of your background and what you're passionate about.
This is the topic that I'm passionate about, but I'm a research nerd. I run a lab where we get to answer and ask all of these questions that are very relevant to our everyday life. I also think it's relevant that I'm a mom and former female athlete. I really am passionate about helping people feel better and improve their health and quality of life in very practical and effective ways.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'd love for you to share a little bit about the differences in women's research versus even like men's research. And I know you're a huge advocate of that, but can you just share with our audience kind of what that looks like and what that landscape is for how much goes into actual women's studies and what we're going to talk about today?
Collectively, when we look at the science that we have related to exercise and nutrition, it's really all been based on data in men, which is a great launching point, but we know so much that our female physiology differs and impacts so many of our body functions. And so really we have a lack of research in that space, which, there's many labs that are trying to contribute to that, one of them mine. I think more importantly, when we have this really good understanding of physiology, the time is now, even without all of this concrete data, to really say like how and why should we be doing things different for our women. And hopefully we'll get to talk about that a little bit today.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're going to dive right in. Like I said, guys, we are going to go through the life cycle and the various stages that we as women experience. So let's start with number one, the menstrual cycle. So how does this influence a woman's nutritional needs, right? We go through a cycle every 28 to maybe 31 days. And I know that can vary based on the person, but we all know that we feel differently throughout those cycles. So how do we support ourselves both through nutrition and movement?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to identify that women do feel different across the menstrual cycle, and that's very much based on physiology. And so that's usually related to sleep and fatigue and metabolism and soreness. And I view nutrition as a way that just helps us feel better. You're not going to take the menstrual cycle away, and you're not, no one should tell women not to exercise in different phases of their menstrual cycle. But for instance, most women feel the most different in the luteal phase, which is kind of really toward the end of the month, right before you menstruate. We call that high hormone phase, where you have high estrogen, high progesterone, as well as the few days right before you menstruate, the premenstrual phase. Those are when most people have the biggest symptoms related to period pain and all the way down to anxiety and depression. So when we think about nutrition that can support that, one of the first things I like to talk about is during that phase, we generally have an increased energy expenditure, just meaning we burn more calories. It's also the time when we feel our worst. We typically gain a couple pounds. We don't feel as good. And so oftentimes when women undereat, when in reality our caloric requirements are higher. And so one of the things we can do is actually just, I always joke, when you crave some of that, the sweet stuff, there's a physiology behind it. Like actually go ahead and have that snack and fuel a little bit better. And that can impact some of the things like soreness and fatigue.
Mm-hmm. And then, when you think about you're on your period, and then obviously right after that, is there anything that we should be doing from like protein or supplements or anything that can, again, keep us active and moving, but also making sure that we're not overdoing it and stressing our bodies out?
Yeah, and I would say this across all phases of the menstrual cycle, but particularly in that time right before and during menstruation, of prioritizing eating prior to your exercise can be really helpful. And that's more helpful for women than men. And specifically, we've looked at a lot of having a small amount of protein prior to exercise versus carbohydrate. And it's pretty amazing. It actually helps your workouts. It helps you recover. It helps you burn more calories and burn more fat. Versus many women are kind of, I mean, we were always taught to we exercise to burn calories when actually, that's not what we should be doing. So fueling can actually have better results and help us feel better.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move through pregnancy. I have a lot of people listening that have either, just had a baby, or maybe they're pregnant right now. They're thinking about it. And, I think, gosh, I've done it 3 times. You've done it. And so nutrition is so important during that time. And, there's a lot of information out there. But again, how can we support ourselves and our bodies through pregnancies and then even just postpartum?
I mean, I don't know if I can fit this in just a couple of minutes, but I think it's really providing empowerment to women that it's really important to eat during this phase of life. And one approach I've taken is, it's eating all the foods, but really focusing on the foods that we should be eating, right? Our complex carbohydrates, our proteins, our whole grains. But really, it's also focusing on the things that we might not get enough of. And so one of the things that often we lack during pregnancy is whole grains and fiber, which can impact constipation, which is really common in third trimester. Absolutely protein, partly because our palate changes. So often women no longer want to eat animal-based proteins. They just don't have the taste for it, which can impact just growth and development and muscle loss, as well as bone loss. So to me, that's where, some more palatable protein sources can be helpful: dairy, eggs, and then obviously a protein shake if you can't get it from other sources. Yeah. And within that, one of my areas of research is related to creatine. I wouldn't put that like number one top on the list, but it's important to mention is if we're eating fewer animal proteins, then we're getting lower levels of creatine in the diet. And there's some fascinating data that shows it helps support, kind of some hard outcomes at birth, but development of the fetus, as well as prevent some postpartum depression. And so it's a kind of a low risk, tangible way to support that. The last thing that I like to think about is essential fatty acids and omega-3. That's also very difficult to get into the diet, especially when they tell you to minimize certain fish intake. And so an omega-3, so eating salmon obviously would be number one, but then an omega-3 supplement can be really important for like you're creating brain and spinal cord, and it supports some of that postpartum depression or prevention of. Let me say one more thing that I think is often overlooked is hydration. So many women struggle with producing breast milk, and it's driven by hydration and complex carbohydrates. So really utilizing our electrolyte beverages and maximizing our complex carbs is really what impacts breast milk production.
Yeah, I remember I would eat like a bowl of oatmeal every morning and a big glass of water, and that would help boost my production if, I was feeling like I was struggling. So I love to hear that, it is in our control in some capacity that, we can provide for our kids. So, on the research topic, I know a lot of supplements will come out with the claim of like, do not take if you're pregnant, or ask your doctor if you're pregnant. Is that just simply because we haven't tested enough pregnant women, or is there actually, any harm in taking supplements during pregnancy or postpartum when you're breastfeeding?
Yeah, I mean, generally you don't want to take anything, but then you really have to look at, and that's because we don't know the impact on the fetus. But then we have to look at what is it that we're getting through our food that can also maybe more effectively come through a supplement, or maybe we can't get through our food. And so it is also a population that's hard to study, to provide some of these ingredients. But I'll just take, for instance, fish oil, for example. It also wouldn't be very worthwhile to do a fish oil supplement in pregnancy, because I could also get it through fish. And as long as I have a high quality fish oil supplement, it would be like eating enough salmon, but I can't eat salmon every day. So it's that replacement. I would say the same thing with creatine. As long as it's a third party, high quality tested product, it really is the same as eating 5 or 6 chicken breasts. Again, not something I can do, especially during pregnancy. So it's really replacing an element of food that your body naturally makes. So those are the, you wouldn't want to go do something crazy, but some of those more natural things there's some really great growing data.
Awesome. All right, so let's move into the next, phase of the life cycle, and that is perimenopause. So if you could please just define that for our audience. We're starting to hear a lot more about it, but I think it is still something that we don't have enough information to empower ourselves. So let's define what it is, how it impacts women, and then, of course, what they can do to help with their bone health, help with their hormonal health as all those changes are happening.
Yeah, so perimenopause is definitely a window that's often not discussed. I agree there's more conversation. And really what it is when we begin some kind of intermittent changes to our period, our menstrual cycle. And so it's not as consistent. It doesn't come monthly. Average onset is 42, but many women experience it earlier. And that transition out of perimenopause into the single time of postmenopause is essentially when you haven't had a period for 12 months in a row. Okay. And that's average 52. And so it's really important to realize it can last up to 10 years. And it's, I would say it impacts both women and the men that they interact with. And it's a hard time in life because it's not only these physical changes. So women do gain fat, they lose muscle, their bone density changes, their insides change. We see increases in cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. And then on top of that, we see big changes to the brain, increases in anxiety and depression. We also have impacts on sleep. And most women relate to vasomotor symptoms, night sweats, hot flashes. And so it's really this phase in time that no one tells us about, yet it impacts every phase of life.
Yeah. Okay, so you talked a little bit about the loss of some muscle and maybe gaining fat. Is that just because of the hormone shifts happening in our body? And what can we do to combat that? Obviously focusing on bone health and muscle build through the protein, through strength training, but anything else that you recommend?
Yeah, so I think one, it's helpful. Like I hear from so many women that, I'm working harder, or I've continued to do the same thing and my body doesn't respond. And so as a physiologist, one thing to do is like switch it up. If you've never been swimming, go swim. Like we're not as efficient at those things, which are helpful. If you've never done heavy lifting, heavy lift. And so kind of switch up the exercise, but then it goes back to what I mentioned. It's not just fat loss, but our muscle becomes less responsive to some of the things that we're feeding it, like proteins. And so it seems right now, and we're really trying to understand what's happening physiologically, but right now it does seem that if you can load the muscle and really focus on kind of fueling around that exercise with either high intensity interval training or resistance training, along with a little bit of extra protein, lots of fruits and vegetables, those things can really help support some of and kind of prevent some of the metabolic changes that we see happening during that time. And so, your body is still going to have changes, but I think one really important piece too is one, you're never too old to start some of this exercise and nutrition, and the habits that you make, like the sooner the better, particularly in this phase. Like the habits that we make right now in perimenopause have dramatic increases and improvements on our health and lifelong health. So like prioritizing ourselves right now can be really helpful.
Yeah, and that's tough because typically in that age group, you are still caretaking for your kids, or maybe they, have just left and you're kind of adjusting to life without. And so just want to acknowledge that not only are you going through that, but just another reason why putting yourself first and taking care of yourself, right, is super important, because it's setting you up for really that next phase that we're going to get into, which is postmenopausal. So you mentioned 52 is around the age, right, that you start to go into postmenopausal if you haven't had a period for a year?
Yeah, average age. And what I always say is ask your mom. So usually there's a familial component. So usually you may have similar symptoms and time frame of both perimenopause and postmenopause. So 52 is average onset.
Okay, so now I think about like my mom, for an example, and of course she went to the doctor. And is there ever a need to help balance hormones by putting more hormones in your body, or what's your take on that? And do you do any research on that?
I don't specifically look at hormone replacement therapy, but the research is ever growing. And what I would say is, for a long time, women were kind of feared against using hormones due to the increased risk of breast cancer, but some of that data wasn't super comprehensive. And what we're seeing now is a small dose of hormones can actually significantly improve health and quality of life. And so, yeah, I think women, we tend to like put ourselves through things that we don't necessarily need to do. We suffer in silence, I guess.
Yeah.
And I do think sometimes it's hard to find a provider, but the science into hormones is ever growing. And I would encourage, especially both with hormones and, weight gain, there's people that specialize in this and can really have a big impact on how we feel and our health as well. So hormones are less taboo, and they actually have, I would say the same thing, like men get testosterone, like why wouldn't women get estrogen? And there's some really good science growing around that.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So postmenopausal, what changes with nutrition? Do we need as much food? Do we need different food, to nourish our body? Obviously, I would assume we still want to encourage that, you are active and you're working out, whether that's strength training, swimming, walking. So your activity level stays the same, maybe slightly different, but then what does happen to your needs from your nutrition perspective?
Yeah, so postmenopause is pretty much a steady hormone. Your hormones have kind of seceded, and so women feel a little bit better. But in order to maintain some of that health, we really want to focus on maintaining bone density and general body composition, and you would have those same habits. And so I wouldn't tell, a woman in her late 60s or even early 60s to do anything different. We still want to be lifting weights, loading the skeleton. Nutritionally, a big component is many times our palate does change. So older adults don't want as much animal protein and often eat less. And so fueling continues to remain important. And one big thing that we see is just a term called sarcopenia, a loss of muscle. Our muscles, both men and women, become less responsive to some of those proteins. And so it's just a bit more important to continue that. And when you think of inflammation as we get older, just the importance of fruits and vegetables to help with that kind of inflammation overall.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I'm going to do a little quick rapid fire before we wrap up here. So just really quickly, I want you to tell us your top 3 favorite supplements that you kind of have to have in your pantry, and then maybe your top 3 food items that you have to have in your pantry.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Top 3 supplements. I would probably go with food first, but you asked me supplements first. So I'll say creatine monohydrate, omega-3, and vitamin D would be my top 3.
Okay.
My top 3 foods, Fage Greek yogurt, my staple, some sort of nut, and gosh, I'll go with something boring like chicken. You can cook it so many ways, so it's a staple.
You can, and the other stuff is quick and easy, and it gets your protein and your fats in, so I love it.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Abbie, thank you so much for joining us here on the Burn Bootcamp podcast. Guys, hopefully you got some really good nuggets out of that. Listen, you are not alone. There's a lot of women around you that are also going through these different phases of life, so, we want to keep this conversation going. We want you to feel supported. There's a lot of great research happening, a lot of great conversations happening to give you guys tools and resources to support your body through whatever phase you are going through. So once again, Abbie, thanks so much. If people want to hear more from you, where can they find you?
I do a little on social media, Abbie Smith-Ryan, and I do have a website as well, Abbie Smith-Ryan, PhD.
All right. Well, thanks for the work that you're doing, and thanks for spending some time with us today.
Thanks for having me. Great to chat.
All right, we're gonna end like we always do. I don't know if you remember this from a member summit, but it's 2 claps on 2. I'll do 1, 2, and then we clap. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Here we go. 2 claps on 2. 1, 2.